In 1962, every house on the street kept a small enamel tin beside the stove, half full of golden mutton fat your nan had strained through muslin after the Sunday roast, and that dripping went into everything from frying lamb chops to spreading on toast with a sprinkle of salt. Then the doctors came along in the 70s and called it poison in a jar. Today, lipid scientists in peer-reviewed journals are quietly admitting that the women who lived through rationing knew more about cooking fat than the marketing department at Meadow Lee ever did. That tin of dripping is only the beginning of what we lost. Number 23 on this list stood illegal across most of Australia until 1993, and modern science now ranks it as one of the healthiest red meats on the planet. Number 6 contains a chemical compound that kills MRSA in laboratory dishes, and it grew wild in your uncle's Queensland backyard if he lived north of Coffs Harbour. Number 2 has roughly 100 times the vitamin C of an orange, and CSIRO scientists only worked that out long after the Australian Women's Weekly had stopped printing the recipe. These were not old wives' tales. These were techniques perfected by women cooking for shearers in the Riverina, by Aboriginal elders on country in Arnhem Land, by Greek and Italian migrants who'd just stepped off the ship in Port Melbourne, with seedlings hidden in their suitcases, and by Country Women's Association ladies in every small town, from Wagga Wagga to Walgett. Before we get into it, hit that subscribe button because what you're about to learn might genuinely change the way you cook. And stick around to the end, where we count down to the one technique that was literally banned for human consumption across most of Australia for the entire decade. Now, 28 forgotten cooking tricks from 1960s Australia. The wisdom that food companies, dietary advisors, and a generation of well-meaning experts convinced an entire country to forget. Number 28, the cloth-boiled pudding. Before microwave ovens crept into Aussie kitchens during the late 70s, your nan would chop beef suet fine, mix it through flour, breadcrumbs, dried fruit, and a generous slosh of golden syrup. Wrap the whole lot in a floured tea towel and lower the bundle into a saucepan of simmering water for 3 full hours. Steam fogged the windows, the smell of treacle and sultanas crept through every room of the weatherboard. And when the pudding finally came out, the cloth peeled back to reveal a dome so moist you could press a spoon straight through it. Food labs have since measured exactly why this works. Steaming holds the interior at a stable 100 degrees, and the suet softens at around 50, which waterproofs the starch matrix from the inside and gives the pudding a texture no oven-baked sponge can quite match. Sara Lee killed the ritual once their frozen cheesecakes hit the supermarket freezer aisle. The recipe is still sitting in any old CWA cookery book, patient as ever, waiting for someone with the time to set a saucepan to simmer for an afternoon. Number 27. The Lamington nobody bakes properly anymore. Here's a detail your grandmother knew that most modern recipe books skip entirely. A fresh sponge falls apart the moment you dip it in chocolate icing. The proper technique, the one practiced at every CWA cake stall and church fete from Brisbane to Bendigo, called for sponge bake the day before, sitting overnight under a tea towel before you cut it into 5cm cubes. Food scientists call that overnight rest starch retrogradation. The amylose chains firm up while you sleep, giving the crumb just enough structure to take the chocolate dip without disintegrating. And the desiccated coconut crust then acts as a moisture barrier that keeps the inside soft for 3 or 4 days. Try it with same-day sponge, the way the modern Pinterest recipes tell you, and you'll end up with brown sludge on the bench. Bake it the day before, the CWA way, and you've got a Lamington that survives a long drive to the next fundraiser. Number 26. The golden syrup binder in ANZAC biscuits. Every household had a tin of Lyle's golden syrup in the pantry through the 60s, that green and gold can with the dead lion swarming with bees on the label. And every ANZAC day saw mums up and down the country baking the same biscuit. 1 cup of rolled oats, 1 cup of plain flour, 1 cup of desiccated coconut, 1 cup of brown sugar, butter, golden syrup, and bicarb dissolved in boiling water. Notice what is missing from that list. There are no eggs in an ANZAC biscuit, and that single absence is the trick almost everyone has forgotten. Eggs were precious during the war years when the recipe spread, so golden syrup did the binding work instead. Golden syrup is partially inverted sugar, which holds onto moisture far better than caster, and that small piece of pantry chemistry is the entire reason a properly made ANZAC stays chewy in the tin for a fortnight. The Department of Veterans Affairs still polices the recipe and the name. They must legally be called Biscuits, never cookies, and the recipe cannot deviate substantially from the original. Number 25. The Pavlova chemistry that is slipping away. Whether the Pav was born in Wellington or Perth is an argument best left for the Tasman cricket. But the Australian Women's Weekly perfected the technique that turned a simple meringue into a national obsession through the 60s. Here's the part nobody talks about. A teaspoon of white vinegar and a tablespoon of corn flour folded in after the egg whites have whipped to stiff peaks. Then a slow 90 minutes at 120 degrees. And you leave it to cool inside the oven with the door cracked open. The acid in the vinegar gently denatures the oval albumin protein in the egg whites, letting the foam hold more air. The corn flour soaks up the moisture that sugar releases as it dissolves, and that partnership creates the crisp shell with the marshmallow center. Skip either, and you have ordinary meringue. Get the chemistry right, top it with whipped cream and passion fruit and a scatter of strawberries, and you have the dessert that defined Christmas lunch on the back deck for an entire generation. Number 24. The Bottling Pantry. Every house in country Victoria, every kitchen on every dairy farm in northern New South Wales, every quarter-acre block in suburban Adelaide kept a row of Vacola jars in the pantry, each one filled with homemade tomato relish, plum chutney, lemon butter or pickled beetroot, and most of them carried handwritten labels in Nan's looping cursive. The CWA recipe ran almost identical from town to town. 2 kilos of ripe tomatoes, half a kilo of onions, sugar, malt vinegar, curry powder, mustard, ground ginger, simmered for 90 minutes until thick, then bottled hot into sterilised jars. The science behind the keeping is brutally simple. Vinegar pulls the pH below 4.6, and at that acidity, botulism spores cannot germinate. Sugar lowers water activity, heat sterilises the jar. 3 checkpoints, 1 shelf-stable preserve that kept for years without refrigeration. Then Heinz and Rosella and Masterfoods spent 20 years convincing an entire generation that they were too busy to make their own. The supermarket condiment aisle is what remains of that argument. Number 23. Lamb's fry and bacon. The Iron Tonic walk into any country pub through the 60s and the chalkboard had lamb's fry on the lunch menu. At 2 and 6 a serve. At home, your mum would soak the liver in milk for 2 or 3 hours, peel the outer membrane, slice it 5 millimeters thick, dust the pieces in seasoned flour and fry them in dripping with rashers of bacon. Mashed potato, brown gravy, peas on the side, and a generation of Australian kids grew up with the kind of iron levels modern doctors are now prescribing tablets to fix. Liver is, gram for gram, the most nutrient-dense food on the planet. Heme iron the body absorbs 10 times more easily than the iron from spinach. Vitamin B12 well above the daily intake from a single serve. Plus vitamin A, folate, copper, choline, and zinc in serious quantities. The milk soak draws out the bitter compounds. The flour dusting gives you the Maillard crust without overcooking the inside. The 70s arrived, prosperity climbed, and offal got rebranded as poor people's food. The supplements aisle replaced what Nan served on a Tuesday night. Number 22. The Sunday Rabbit Casserole. If you grew up in Sydney or Melbourne in the early 50s, the rabbito came down your street with a wooden cart and a string of fresh rabbits slung over his shoulder, calling out his price as the screen doors slammed open. Rabbit was the poor man's chook, threepence a pair before decimal, and your Nan stewed it slow with bacon, pearl onions, thyme, and a glug of beer or cider for 3 hours, until the meat fell off the bone. Then 1950 happened. CSIRO released myxomatosis into the wild to control the plague-level rabbit numbers, and within a few years the wild population had collapsed. The rabbito's cart vanished from the suburbs, and rabbit quietly disappeared from the family table. Modern nutrition data puts wild rabbit at 22% protein, 8% fat, almost no saturated fat at all, loaded with B12 and selenium. The meat was leaner than chicken breast, and we lost it to a virus. Number 21. Damper bake direct in the ashes. Every shearer's camp, every droving plant, every Sunday picnic in the bush ended the same way. Flour, salt, water, a knob of butter kneaded into a rough round, dropped into a fire pit, raked over with hot ashes, and left for 30 minutes while the billy boiled. Aboriginal women had been grinding native grass seeds, kangaroo grass and native millet, into the same kind of bread for at least 50,000 years before the first fleet arrived. with the oldest grinding stones in Central Australia dated to that figure. The settlers borrowed the method, only with wheat flour. The name comes from damping down the fire to bake in the embers, and the technique outlasted every fancy oven the colony ever imported. Tip Top and Sunblessed and Wonder White killed the bush damper through the late 50s and 60s, the sliced loaf in plastic wrapping replacing a technique tens of thousands of years old. Bake one in a camp oven on your next holiday, butter it hot, and you'll wonder why anyone ever swapped. Number 20. Billy Tea. With a gum leaf out on the road, on the stock route, in the back paddock at Smoko, the kettle was a black tin can hanging from a forked stick, and the ritual ran exactly the same every time. Boil the water hard, throw in a fistful of loose bushels, drop a fresh eucalyptus leaf into the brew for 30 seconds, then swing the whole billy in a full vertical loop above your head. Centrifugal force pinning the leaves to the bottom of the can. Sounds like a bush yarn invented by a man with a corked hat. It actually works. The eucalyptus leaf was not there just for flavor. Eucalyptus leaves contain a compound called cineole, the same active ingredient in old cough syrups, and a trace of it dissolves into the boiling tea, giving the bush brew a faint medicinal edge that helps settle a dodgy gut on the road. Tea bags and Nescafe killed the billy in suburbia by 1970. Out west, the older blokes still know how to swing one. Number 19. The Coolgardie Safe. Before the Kelvinator and the Westinghouse rolled into every suburban kitchen, the household fridge was a wooden cabinet wrapped in wet hessian, a shallow tray of water sitting on top, and strips of flannel wicking the water down the sides. As the breeze blew through the hessian, evaporation pulled heat out of the cabinet, dropping the inside temperature by 10 or 15 degrees below the air outside. Milk, butter, meat and fruit kept fresh for days without a single watt of electricity. Arthur Patrick McCormick invented it in the goldfields town of Coolgardie in Western Australia in the 1890s. And remote stations across the country were still running them through the 60s because the electricity grid had not yet reached the back blocks. Pure physics, no power bill. The same principle is used today in Sudanese Zia pots and Indian Macca coolers. And CSIRO engineers still cite the design in low-energy refrigeration papers. We swapped a free invention for a power-hungry box and called it progress. Number 18. The dripping tin beside the stove. After the Sunday roast came off, your mum poured the rendered mutton fat through muslin into a small enamel tin, and that golden lard sat on the back of the stove all week, ready for frying chops, sautéing cabbage, mashing into bread for the legendary dripping toast with a pinch of salt. Then margarine arrived in the 70s riding the saturated fat scare. Meadow Lee, ETA, and Flora spent millions to convince an entire generation that the dripping tin sitting on Nan's stove was killing them. The science got revisited in the 2000s. A landmark 2014 meta-analysis in the Annals of Internal Medicine reviewed decades of trials and found no clear link between saturated fat intake and cardiovascular disease. Mutton dripping has a smoke point above 200 degrees, far more stable for high heat cooking than most of the seed oils that replaced it. Use it in moderation, but use it. Your grandmother had the chemistry right. The food industry just had the better marketing budget. Number 17. The drying line. Out the back of the station, out on the cattle runs in the Northern Territory and the Pilbara, station cooks could not rely on a fridge. So the answer was simple. Slice the mutton or beef into 5mm strips with the grain, rub them hard with coarse salt, then hang them on wire lines in the dry outback air for 2 or 3 days until they took on a leather texture. Store the strips in cotton bags, reconstitute them in stews and curries through the dry season. The principle is what food scientists now call lowering water activity. Drop the moisture in meat below 0.85 and bacteria simply cannot multiply. South American gauchos called it charqui. The Aussies just called it jerky. Tinned corned beef and the rapid spread of station fridges through the late 60s and early 70s retired the practice. But you can still walk into any northern roadhouse run by an old hand and find someone making it the old way, because the chemistry has not changed. Number 16. Old Man Saltbush. Across the inland plains, sheep grazed on saltbush, the silvery grey-green leaves that survived where almost nothing else would. And the station cooks knew exactly how to use the same plant their flocks were eating. Pick the leaves, dry them, crush them, and you have a salt substitute that supplies trace minerals plain table salt cannot touch. Better still, batter fresh leaves in light tempura and deep fry them for a crisp, salty wafer that turns an ordinary mutton chop into something a city restaurant would charge $20 a plate for. Saltbush-fed lamb now sells as a premium product in fine dining restaurants from Sydney to Melbourne, with documented higher omega-3 content than grain-fed. The old station cooks were ahead of the journal articles by half a century. They just never bothered to write any of it down. The peer-reviewed evidence eventually caught up to what every sheep in the western paddocks had been telling us. Number 15. Pigface, the Beachside Seasoning Walk. Any stretch of coast from Cape Otway to Geraldton through the 60s and you would see this low, succulent crawling over the dunes, hot pink flowers and fleshy little finger-shaped leaves that tasted of the sea. Aboriginal nations along every coast in southern Australia had been eating pigface, called karkalla in some languages, for tens of thousands of years, before European footprints ever crossed the high tide line. The leaves accumulate sodium, potassium and magnesium from the salty soil, giving you a natural salt substitute that comes built in with a balanced trace of electrolytes. The bright pink fruit, which tastes oddly like a salty fig, was eaten raw or boiled into jam. Modern chemists have measured precisely what is inside those leaves and confirmed that they deliver sodium, potassium, and vitamin C in a ratio your body absorbs as effectively as any commercial sports drink. The plant was growing on every beach in 1960. We just walked past it on the way to the kiosk. Number 14. Green ants, the bush lemonade. Up in far north Queensland and across the top end, the Kuku, Yalanji and Larrakia people had a remedy for a fever that the European settlers wrote off as primitive. Crush a handful of green-bottomed weaver ants, the ones that build leaf nests up in the rainforest canopy, mix them into water and drink. The taste is sharp and citrus, more like lime than lemon, and it cuts straight through a head cold the way no bushels brew ever could. Modern food chemists have now identified the source of the flavour. The ants concentrate ascorbic acid, ordinary vitamin C, in their green abdomens, along with formic acid which provides the citrus tang. The 2021 analysis in the journal Future Foods found green ants high in protein, vitamin C, iron, zinc, magnesium, and B12, with documented antimicrobial activity in the extracts. The technique was active in Aboriginal communities through the entire 60s and entirely off the radar in suburban Brisbane. The world's most expensive restaurants now serve green ants as a garnish. Number 13. Warrigal greens, the vegetable that saved Captain Cook's crew. When the Endeavour anchored at Botany Bay in 1770, Cook's botanist Joseph Banks picked a coastal succulent with arrow-shaped leaves and fed it to the crew, and the symptoms of scurvy started clearing within days. Banks shipped seeds back to Kew Gardens. Cook's crew sailed home alive. The plant is Warrigal greens, native New Zealand spinach, growing wild along the entire southern Australian coast and most of New Zealand. Through the 60s, it had quietly vanished from suburban kitchens, dismissed by most cooks as a weed, while supermarket spinach took over the salad bowl. The technique the old foragers knew is that Warrigal leaves contain oxalates, so you blanch them for 90 seconds in boiling water, drain the water away, then sauté with garlic and a slug of olive oil. Cook intuited what modern nutritionists later confirmed. Loads of vitamin C, beta-carotene, magnesium and iron, exactly what a scurvy-ridden crew needed, growing wild on every coastal headland the Endeavour passed. Number 12. The Quandong, the desert peach drive west of Port Augusta, or up through the Flinders Ranges in the 60s and you would see the bright red fruits hanging on small trees in the dry red dirt, and every station kitchen knew exactly what to do with them. The Adnyamathan and Pidjantjatjara peoples had been eating quandongs for thousands of years, drying the fruits flat in the sun for storage that ran up to 8 years without losing flavour. The CWA cookbooks of the era have quandong pie, quandong jam and quandong chutney. Vitamin C levels in the fresh fruit run twice that of an orange, and the seeds contain antibacterial compounds the food researchers are still studying today. The reason a quandong kept for 8 years on a station pantry shelf is straightforward. Once you drop the water activity low enough through sun drying, the natural acids in the fruit do the rest of the preservation work for free. We swapped quandong pie for canned IXL peaches, and the desert peach quietly slipped off the menu. Number 11. The macadamia we forgot was ours. This nut is native to the rainforests of southeast Queensland and northern New South Wales, used as food by the Kup-Murri and Bundjalung peoples for tens of thousands of years before any Europeans saw one. Then in the early 20th century, a Hawaiian agricultural board planted Australian macadamia seedlings and built a $100 million industry out of them, and most Aussies through the 60s genuinely believed the nut came from Honolulu. Commercial Australian macadamia orchards only took off from 1963 onward, the country slowly reclaiming its own tree. The oil from macadamia kernels has the highest monounsaturated fat content of any common edible oil at around 80%, even higher than olive oil, and it is uniquely rich in palmitoleic acid, an omega-7 fatty acid linked in trials to improved insulin sensitivity. A 2000 study published in JAMA Internal Medicine showed a macadamia-rich diet lowered LDL cholesterol as effectively as the American Heart Association's official low-fat diet. We grew the world's healthiest cooking oil in our own backyard and forgot to use it. Number 10. The Bunya nut and the Cold Creek. Every 2 or 3 years through the spring, the great Bunya pines of southeast Queensland drop cones the size of footballs, each cone packed with around 100 nuts the size of small almonds. The Waka Waka, Kabi Kabi, and Jarawaya peoples travelled hundreds of kilometres to the Bunya gatherings, an enormous ceremonial event in the Aboriginal calendar of southern Queensland. Storage was the genius of the technique. Fresh Bunya nuts were buried in the cold mud of running creeks, where they fermented gently for months, developing umami complexity that the cooks then turned into a delicacy. The exact same principle Korean families use today with kimchi buried in earthenware crocks. Boil Bunya nuts 30 minutes, shell them carefully, slice and fry in butter, and you have a nut delivering around 9% protein, complex carbs, a low glycemic index, and antibacterial compounds. Modern researchers are now examining. Colonization felled most of the Bunya forests for timber and ended the great gatherings, but the technique survived in Aboriginal families who carried the knowledge through generations of upheaval. Number 9. Wattleseed, the bush coffee. During the Second World War, when imported coffee was unavailable and rationing tightened across Australia, country families roasted the seeds of certain wattle trees and ground them as a coffee extender. Aboriginal women had been grinding wattle seed for at least 4,000 years before that. The grinding stones in Central Australia carbon dated to roughly that figure, and the technique remained a routine part of Western desert food preparation through the entire 60s. White Australia had simply forgotten it once real coffee returned to the shelves. The numbers are striking. Wattle seed runs around 25% protein, dramatically higher than most non-meat foods, plus a low glycemic index and zero caffeine. The World Health Organization has actually sent Australian wattle cultivars to drought-prone parts of Africa as a food security crop, validating what Aboriginal Australia knew before anyone wrote a paper on the subject. Brew a heaped teaspoon of roasted ground wattle seed in a plunger for 4 minutes, and the flavour sits somewhere between coffee, chocolate and hazelnut, with no 3 o'clock crash to follow. Number 8. Cooking fish in paperbark. Across the top end, the Yolngu of Arnhem Land, the Larrakia around Darwin, and the Jawoyn in the Katherine region have been wrapping fish, particularly barramundi, in the soft layered bark of the paperbark tree and cooking the parcel directly on hot eucalyptus coals for thousands of years. Through the 60s, this remained active, everyday practice in Aboriginal communities, while suburban Australia was getting introduced to alfoil from Reynolds Wrap and thinking it was the latest thing. The technique is basically a steam on coals sous vide. The wet bark creates a steam envelope inside the parcel, holding the temperature at boiling point, so the fish protein never overcooks, while the outside of the bark takes the Maillard browning from the coals. Better still, paperbark itself contains volatile terpenes, similar in chemistry to tea tree oil, which are mildly antimicrobial. Aboriginal Australia had developed a kitchen technology that protected the food chemically while cooking it perfectly. The CSIRO has since published the chemistry. The technique itself is older than agriculture. Number 7. The earth oven, the Kup-Murri. In the Torres Strait on Arub and Mer and Thursday Island, islander families dig a pit, build a hot fire of mangrove or wattle, heat large river stones until they glow red, line the pit with banana leaves, layer in whole fish, taro, sweet potato, and dugong on ceremonial occasions, cover the whole feast with damp leaves and a thick layer of earth, and steam it for 3 or 4 hours. Mainland Aboriginal nations had their own versions of the earth oven going back tens of thousands of years. Through the entire 60s, this remained current Torres Strait Islander culture, particularly around the coming of the Light Festival every 1st of July. The science behind it is the exact principle the American barbecue scene rediscovered in the 2000s and called low and slow. A long, low, moist heat dissolves collagen into gelatin, turning the toughest cut into something a fork goes through without effort. The cooking technology of the Kup-Murri predates farming by tens of thousands of years. The food trend cycle eventually wandered back around to it. Number 6. Mountain pepperberry, the spice that preserves the meat. Down in the cool forests of Tasmania and the alpine fringes of Victoria and New South Wales, a small native shrub called Tasmania lanceolata drops dark purple-black berries that taste like fierce hot black pepper at first, then bloom into a long, sweet, complex finish. Tasmanian Palawa people use the berries for both flavour and preservation, and the reason it preserves so well is a sesquiterpene compound called polygodial. Peer-reviewed studies, including a 2018 paper published in PMC, have documented broad-spectrum antimicrobial activity from polygodial, including activity against yeasts, Salmonella cholerae and Aspergillus and Penicillium molds. Through the entire decade of the 60s, this spice remained completely unknown to mainstream Australian cooking, hidden inside Palawa knowledge and a few remote forager memories. Use 1/3 of the quantity you would use of ordinary black pepper. Dust it onto kangaroo or beef before grilling, and you have a spice seasoning the meat and inhibiting the bugs at the same time. Number 5. The Witchetty grub, the original protein bar, out in the Western Desert. The Arente, Pitjantjatjara, Anmatiere, and Walpiri women have always known exactly which root systems hide the fat white larvae of the cossid moth. And the knowledge passes from mother to daughter the same way it has for tens of thousands of years. You dig them out, you eat them raw, where they taste like almond cream, or you roast them on hot coals for 30 seconds, where they crisp up like chicken skin. White Australia in the 60s mostly recoiled at the idea, calling it eating bugs, while every grub on offer represented exactly the kind of complete protein the country was paying extra for at the butcher. Per 100 grams, Witchetty grubs deliver around 15% protein and 20% fat, and that fat is dominated by oleic acid, the same monounsaturated fat that olive oil is celebrated for. They carry more iron than lean beef, all 9 essential amino acids, plus vitamin B1, zinc, magnesium, and potassium in serious quantities. The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization now cites Witchetty grubs as a model sustainable protein. The Arente women called it Tuesday. Number 4. Sugarbag honey, the medicine in the hollow tree. Across the northern and eastern half of Australia, native stingless bees the size of a fruit fly build small hives inside hollow trees and produce a honey that Aboriginal peoples have followed and harvested for 60,000 years. The genius of the technique is that sugarbag was never just food. It has always been used as medicine for sores, wounds, and skin infections, applied directly to the skin and trusted as both healer and sweetener. Modern science has now caught up in spectacular fashion. In June 2025, Dr. Kenya Fernandez and her team at the University of Sydney published research in Applied and Environmental Microbiology showing that sugarbag honey has antimicrobial activity comparable to medical-grade manuka, and uniquely, it holds on to that activity even after heat treatment and long storage where manuka loses its punch. Separate research at the University of Queensland identified trehalulose as the dominant sugar in sugarbag, a rare low glycemic sugar that does not spike blood glucose the way ordinary honey does. Suitable for diabetics, antimicrobial, and heat-stable in ways even manuka cannot match. The Yolngu, Larrakia, and Gubbi Gubbi peoples have known it for 60,000 years. The scientific journals caught up last winter. Number 3. Lemon myrtle, the rainforest antibiotic. Up in the wet subtropical rainforests of southeast Queensland, a small understory tree called Backhausia citriodora produces leaves that smell so strongly of citrus that crushing a single one releases a cloud of perfume into the kitchen you can smell from the next room. The Bundjalung Nation used lemon myrtle for flavor and for medicine. Then a 2002 paper by Hayes and Markovich, published in the journal Food and Chemical Toxicology, tested the essential oil and found something extraordinary. The leaves contain 90 to 98% citral, the highest natural concentration of that compound recorded in any plant on Earth. And citral, it turns out, is a serious antimicrobial. The same study and follow-up research confirmed lemon myrtle, essential oil inhibiting MRSA, Staphylococcus aureus, E. coli, Pseudomonas, Candida albicans, Klebsiella, Aspergillus niger, and the acne-causing Propionibacterium. A 2023 study published in the MDP1 journal Plants showed lemon myrtle preventing penicillium mold growth on stored oranges. The Bundjalung used it on cuts and on fish for generations, before any of the science arrived. Modern Australian chefs rub it on chicken without thinking twice. The peer-reviewed evidence suggests it might be doing far more than just seasoning. Number 2. The Kakadu plum, the highest vitamin C in the world. Up in the top end, around the Kakadu wetlands and across the Kimberley, a small unassuming pale green fruit grows on a tree that the Gunjaikhmi, Mayali and Bininj peoples have known and harvested for 60,000 years. Then CSIRO and University of Sydney researchers got around to running the chemical analysis, and the numbers came back so high, the labs initially assumed there had been an error in the equipment. 2,300 to 5,300 milligrams of vitamin C per 100 grams of fresh fruit. An orange, for comparison, carries about 50. That puts the Kakadu plum somewhere between 50 and 100 times the vitamin C content of the fruit Australians had been told for decades was the gold standard of citrus. The antioxidant capacity measured at 13 to 19 times higher than blueberries, the much-marketed superfood of the 2000s. The fruit also carries gallic acid and ellagic acid, both with documented antimicrobial and anti-inflammatory activity in published research. The Northern Australia Aboriginal Kakadu Plum Alliance now leads the commercial harvest, ensuring the benefits flow back to the communities who held the knowledge through the 60s and every decade before. The Australian Women's Weekly printed thousands of recipes during the decade. The world's most vitamin-rich fruit never made the page. Number 1. Kangaroo meat, the only item on this list that was actually banned from the early 20th century. Right through to 1980, kangaroo meat remained illegal to sell for human consumption in every Australian state except South Australia. New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland, Western Australia, Tasmania, and the Northern Territory only legalised it in 1993, processing roo only as pet food. For the entire decade we are talking about, Aboriginal Australians continued to eat kangaroo under cultural rights through the whole period, while a non-Aboriginal housewife in Melbourne or Sydney could not legally buy the meat for her family's dinner. The 1981 export scandal blew the whole situation open. Kangaroo and horse meat had been quietly substituted for beef in Australian export shipments to North America, and the scandal forced the inspection reforms that eventually legalised the domestic trade. The science vindicates Aboriginal Australia completely. Kangaroo runs around 23% protein and just 2.6% fat, making it the leanest red meat commonly available anywhere in the world. It carries the highest natural concentration of conjugated linoleic acid, CLA, of any red meat, and CLA is linked in published trials to reduced body fat, improved insulin sensitivity, and anti-inflammatory effects. The meat on Australia's coat of arms, the animal Indigenous Australia has eaten for 60,000 years, was illegal in your grandmother's kitchen for the entire decade we are discussing. Modern science now calls it the healthiest red meat on the planet. In Arrernte language, the meat is kere ahere. In Pitjantjat Jara, it is malu. Cook it rare, slice it thin against the grain, and you will understand what Aboriginal Australia kept alive while the law looked the other way. That is 28 forgotten cooking tricks from 1960s Australia, the techniques modern science has finally caught up to. Some were never written down. Some sat in CWA recipe books gathering dust on a country pantry shelf for 40 years. Some belonged to Aboriginal nations who held them through assimilation policies designed to erase the knowledge entirely. The Australian Women's Weekly had a test kitchen, Margaret Fulton had her best-selling cookbook, and yet the wisdom that had fed this continent for 60,000 years sat largely outside the suburban kitchen until the native foods movement of the 80s began bringing it back. Here is the question for you down in the comments. Which one of these did your nan, your pop, or your mum still practice when you were growing up? Did your family keep the dripping tin on the back of the stove? Did anyone you know forage Warrigal greens off a beach near Wollongong or Apollo Bay? Was there a Coolgardie Safe on a back veranda out west of Dubbo? Tell us the story, tell us the state, tell us the smell of the kitchen when it was happening. Because every comment becomes a record of a piece of Australia that nearly slipped away. Hit the like button while you are thinking about it, and the subscribe button if you have not already, because next week we are heading back into the smoko tin and pulling out 20 more bush kitchen secrets the supermarket convinced you to forget. Your grandmother knew. Now you know too.